I'm heading to the island of Inchkeith on the hunt for a remarkable piece of history. A story from our medieval past that has a striking modern resonance. Inchkeith is in plain sight of Edinburgh, but the mile of sea that separates it from the mainland made it the perfect place to hide problems that literally plagued the nation. Seen from above, the island's long history as a military base is easy to spot. Gun emplacements, barracks, underground complexes, observation posts. During the Second World War, over 1,000 troops were stationed here, but its strategic position guarding the Forth means beneath them lurk fortifications from much earlier. This wall by the unmanned lighthouse, surviving remnant of the first known fort on the island. It was built by the English, having just beaten the Scots at the Battle of Pinkie in 1547. But the story I'm starting with dates back to the medieval Scottish court and a king with a scientific curiosity, James IV.
The story goes that James had a deaf and mute woman transported here along with 2 infant children. Inchkeith offered the perfect location, near to the royal court, easy to supply with provisions, yet entirely isolated. The woman was supposed to nurse the children until they came of an age when they could speak. The idea was that, isolated from any other form of speech, they'd be free to develop their own language, and that would be the original language of God. What happened? Well, the results are muddled at best. Some claim that the children emerged speaking perfect Hebrew, others that they babbled incomprehensibly, bleating like the island's sheep and goats, their only other companions in isolation.
It's a bizarre story, and the truth of it is uncertain.
What is clear, however, is that it offered up a model for a very specific way of using Inchkeith, a somewhere to put people, to separate them from others. This place would become the epicentre of enforced self-isolation in Scotland. A quarantine island.
Just 2 years after the deaf-mute woman and the mewling bairns were abandoned here, a new, deadly disease began to sweep Europe. Syphilis. It's a bacterial infection spread through sexual contact, which leads to blindness, dementia, and ultimately death. Today it's curable with antibiotics, but for 400 years, it devastated lives.
So this disease had come out of nowhere?
Yeah. The first major recorded incident that we have is 1495, and that seems to have come about when Charles, the King of France, took an army to invade Naples, and in the celebrations thereafter, many of the soldiers got sick with this new disease. And so particularly in those early years, it was extremely virulent, and the symptoms were really bad, worse than they seem to have been a century or so later. And so this was something entirely new that no one knew how.
And how and when did it get to Scotland?
It seems to have gotten to Scotland in about 1497. We don't know exactly how it arrived. There are a number of theories. The fact is that Scotland was not at all isolated in this period, and there were people trading and travelling from all over the place, and so there's any number of ways that it could have first arrived in Scotland. But I think it's telling that the very first boroughs to try and deal with syphilis were Edinburgh and Aberdeen, which are of course major boroughs that are on the eastern coast and trading heavily with the continent.
And how did they react here? What did they try and do?
97, we have a statute relating to syphilis, and that one specifically asks that everybody who is either ill with syphilis or is caring for those who are ill with syphilis need to essentially go to the beach in Leith by 10 a.m. On a given morning, and they're all going to be sent by boat to Inchkeith, to where we are. And it says that if anybody who is affected by syphilis has not gone by that Monday by the time the sun sets, that they will be branded on the cheek with a hot iron and banished from the borough. So this is very stringent and shows again that urgency that they need to deal with this, and they need to deal with it seriously.
It's a grim tale. No wonder this place feels so bleak and disturbing. It's a history that echoes down the years, now more so than ever. Even the vocabulary sounds familiar.
Strictly speaking, this wasn't quarantine, or at least not literally. Quarantine comes from the Italian for 40, because ships that were thought to be carrying the plague were forced to isolate for 40 days before they could enter the plague. Would either kill you in that time, or you'd be disease-free.
But no one back then would ever get better from syphilis. Those sufferers who were sent here would have died here. Their remains lie somewhere beneath these more recent ruins. We don't know their names, and their graves are not marked. Victims of a war against disease were still fighting.
In a passing glance, Inchkeith might seem like just another island. But coming here and exploring it for myself, I can see it's far more than that. What you'll find is a place overflowing with the traces of human activity. The centuries piled up on top of each other, layer after layer. Abandoned by people, but not by their stories. Scratch the surface of this island and you'll find them everywhere.